Welcome to our channel. Hollywood Movie Review. Avatar, Fire and Ash 2025 Movie Review. Avatar, Fire and Ash is a 2025 American epic science fiction film directed by James Cameron from a screenplay he co-wrote with Rick Jaffa and Amanda Silver. Produced by Lightstorm Entertainment, it is the third installment in the Avatar film series and the sequel to Avatar, The Way of Water, 2022. The film features Sam Worthington, Zoe Saldaña, Sigourney Weaver, Stephen Lang, and Kate Winslet reprising their roles from previous films. The story follows the human-turned-NA6 Jake Sully and his family on the habitable moon Pandora, as they face the combined threat of the human RDA forces and the Mang Quan, a ruthless NA6 clan. Following the box office success of Avatar, 2009, Cameron announced two sequels, with Avatar 3 aiming for a December 2015 release. However, the addition of two further sequels and the development of new performance capture technology required to film scenes underwater led to significant delays to allow the crew more time to work on writing, pre-production, and visual effects. Avatar, Fire and Ash started shooting simultaneously with The Way of Water in New Zealand on September 25, 2017, and filming wrapped in late December 2020. With an estimated production budget of at least $350 million, it is one of the most expensive films ever made. Avatar, Fire and Ash had its world premiere at Dolby Theatre in Hollywood, on December 1, 2025, and was released in the United States on December 19 by 20th Century Studios. Critical response was mixed to positive, with praise for its visual effects and spectacle, but criticism for its runtime and script. It was a box office success, grossing $1.490 billion worldwide and becoming the third highest grossing film of 2025, but is the lowest grossing film of the Avatar series. The film received accolades for its visual effects at the 98th Academy Awards and 79th British Academy Film Awards, and was named as one of the top 10 films of 2025 by the American Film Institute and the National Board of Review. Two sequels, Avatar 4 and Avatar 5, are scheduled for release in 2029 and 2031, respectively, though their status is dependent on the financial performance of Fire and Ash. Shortly after the death of Jake and Neytiri's eldest son Nidmd, the Sully family grieves amongst the Metiana, with Neytiri developing a deeper hatred toward humans. After Spider's breathing mask runs out of power during his sleep, Jake and Neytiri decide he must return to the human scientist camp for his safety. The Sully family accompanies him on the trip aboard a fleet of flying merchant vessels. The merchant convoy is ambushed by raiders of the Mang Quan, an aggressive NA6 clan. Led by their matriarch Varang, the Mang Quan loot and set fire to the ships, killing many and scattering the Sully family. After Miles Quaritch captures Jake, the two work together to locate Spider. Meanwhile, Spider collapses when his mask loses power, motivating Jake's adopted daughter Kiri to spontaneously infuse his body with mycelia, which gives him the ability to breathe Pandora's air. The Mang Quan capture Quaritch, Jake, and the children, after which Quaritch teaches Varang how to use firearms. Kiri commands nearby Flora to kill their guards, enabling everyone to escape. The human scientists Norm Spellman and Max Patel believe Spider's mycelia could be reverse-engineered to allow other humans to breathe on Pandora. Kiri learns that she was born from Iwa, but is blocked from connecting with her. Quaritch offers guns and flamethrowers to the Mang Quan and convinces them to form an alliance, then begins an intimate relationship with Varang. Kiri helps Spider explore his newfound ability to neurally connect with other organisms, and they share a kiss. Quaritch captures Spider and then arrives at the Metiana village with the Mang Quan, demanding that Jake turn himself in. Jake surrenders to avoid bloodshed, and he and Spider are taken to the Resources Development Administration, RDA, base. Jake's son Loak searches for Payakan ahead of a Tulkan congregation that will be targeted by RDA hunters. Spider undergoes testing by RDA scientists, while Jake is scheduled to be executed. Neytiri infiltrates the RDA base, and RDA biologist Ian Garvin liberates Jake. After Neytiri, Jake, and Spider escape, Jake regretfully prepares to kill Spider, so the RDA cannot learn any more about his breathing abilities. However, Jake cannot bring himself to kill his adopted son, and he and Neytiri embrace Spider. At the Metiana village, the Tulkun Council hear Jake's warning about an impending massacre, but decide not to change their pacifist ways. However, when Loake brings Payakan and Tanak, both disfigured Tulkun hunting raid survivors, the Tulkun elders reconsider. Jake rebonds with the apex predator Torek and rallies the NA6 clans to battle. When the RDA fleet arrives for the hunt, the Tulkun and NA6 ambush them. However, Quaritch and the Manquan arrive and turn the tide in their favor. The Metiana matriarch Ronal is wounded and dies in childbirth, with Neytiri delivering her baby daughter, Prill, before being captured. With the help of Spider and Jake's daughter Tuck, Kiri finally communicates with Iwa and pleads for help. In answer, the Pandoran wildlife ambush the rest of the RDA forces, saving the cornered Tulkun. Varang tries to kill Neytiri, but is repelled by Kiri. Tanak kills the lead Tulkun hunter Mix Scorsebe. Jake and Quaritch are thrown into a magnetic flux, which is destroying the remaining RDA vessels. As Jake and Quaritch fight, Spider falls off a floating rock, forcing them to work together to save him. When Neytiri and her children arrive, Quaritch throws himself off the rock. After the battle, Spider and the Metiana connect to the underwater spirit trees, where Spider meets all the deceased NA6. Kiri introduces Spider to her mother, Grace, and they initiate him into the NA6 people. Following the box office success of Avatar 2009, Cameron announced 2 sequels, which were originally scheduled for release in 2014 and 2015. And he said he would shoot the sequels back-to-back and at a higher frame rate than the industry standard 24 frames per second, in order to add a heightened sense of reality. In late 2013, he revealed that the sequels would be filmed in New Zealand, with performance capture filming to take place in 2014. An agreement with the New Zealand government required at least one world premiere to be held in Wellington and at least $500 million, roughly $410 million to be spent on production activity in New Zealand, including live-action filming and visual effects. The government announced it would raise its baseline tax rebate for filmmaking from 15% to 20%, with 25% available to international productions in some cases. By February 2016, production of the sequels was scheduled to begin that April. New crew members for the sequels included cinematographer Russell Carpenter, who worked with Cameron on True Lies, 1994, and Titanic, 1997, and art director Ashrita Kamath. Kirk Crack, founder of Performance Freediving International, worked as a freediving trainer for the cast and crew for the underwater scenes. On July 31, 2017, it was announced that the New Zealand-based visual effects studio Weta Digital had commenced work on the Avatar sequels. In a 2023 interview, Cameron announced that the film would feature a new NA6 clan, called the Ash People, who would be antagonists in the film. On August 9, 2024, the title of the film was announced by Cameron at the D23 Disney Fan Convention. Cameron said fire refers to anger, hatred and violence, while ash refers to grief and loss. Rick Jaffa and Amanda Silver were originally announced as Cameron's co-writers. It was later announced that Jaffa, Silver, Josh Friedman, and Shane Salerno all played a role in the writing process for all the films before being assigned to finish separate scripts. According to Cameron, Fire and Ash was split from Avatar, The Way of Water due to an excessive amount of material. When writing Fire and Ash, Cameron prioritized character development over novel spectacles. He introduced the Manquan, or Ash People, a ruthless, warmongering clan of NA6 inspired by the Baining people of Papua New Guinea because he wanted the film series to move beyond the paradigm of all humans are bad, all NA6 are good. He said the nomadic merchant wind traders were inspired by camel caravans of the Spice Road during the Middle Ages. After the 2022 Uvalde school shooting in Texas, Cameron rewrote parts of Fire and Ash to avoid glorifying gun violence and fetishizing assault weapons. Originally, the Metiana decided to use guns to defend the Tulkun, but Cameron changed the script, choosing to have the clan reject firearms instead. Cameron said he did not want guns to contaminate the NA6 culture. After audiences responded positively to the Tulkun character Payakan in The Way of Water, Cameron made changes to Fire and Ash so he would be featured more prominently in the story when they were cast for Avatar. Sam Worthington and Zoe Saldaña had signed on for future sequels. In 2014, Cameron said that Sigourney Weaver would appear in the sequels as a living Grace Augustine. It was later revealed she would instead be playing Kiri, Jake, and Neytiri's adopted daughter. In August 2017, Cameron announced that Stephen Lang would be the main antagonist in all 4 sequels. The same month, Matt Gerald was confirmed to be returning as Corporal Lyle Wainfleet in all upcoming sequels. In October, it was reported that Kate Winslet, who starred in Cameron's film Titanic, 1997, had joined the cast of Avatar 2, and possibly its sequels, as a character named Ronal. Cameron said that working with Winslet on Titanic had been a highlight of his career and that the two of them had been hoping to collaborate again someday. However, Winslet had also been hesitant to work with Cameron again because of the rigorous situations he creates for his actors. She felt her role was strong and well written. In June 2017, Una Chaplin joined the cast as Varang. Although the details of her character were not revealed, Cameron stated that she would appear in the entire saga of the sequels starting with Fire and Ash. Isa Gonzalez also auditioned for the role. Cameron said that Chaplin was able to express Varang's fury, sexuality, and dominating psychology better than other candidates for the role. In January 2018, Dilip Rao was confirmed to return as Dr. Max Patel. In April 2018, David Thewlis announced his involvement in the Avatar franchise. In 2020, he announced that he would be playing a NA6 character in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th films. Principal photography began simultaneously with The Way of Water on September 25, 2017, in Manhattan Beach, California. On November 14, 2018, Cameron announced that performance capture filming with the principal cast had been completed. Live-action filming for The Way of Water and Fire and Ash commenced in New Zealand in early 2019. On March 17, 2020, Landau announced that filming in New Zealand had been postponed indefinitely in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. However, virtual production continued in Manhattan Beach and visual effects work continued at Weta Digital in Wellington. In early May, health and safety production protocols had been endorsed by the New Zealand government, allowing filming to resume in the country. On May 31, part of the Avatar crew, including Cameron, were granted entry into New Zealand under a special visa category for border exemptions for foreigners deemed essential to a project of significant economic value. On June 1, 2020, Landau posted a picture of himself and Cameron on Instagram, showing that they had returned to New Zealand to resume filming. After their arrival, all 55 crew members who had traveled to New Zealand started a 2-week government-supervised isolation period at a hotel in Wellington before they could resume filming. This would make Avatar, The Way of Water and Avatar, Fire and Ash the first major Hollywood blockbusters to resume production after postponing filming due to the pandemic. In September 2020, Cameron announced that 95% of Avatar, Fire and Ash had been completed. Filming wrapped in December. Following the December 2022 release of The Way of Water, Cameron decided to partially rewrite Fire and Ash to incorporate scenes involving the creature Toruk, which was introduced in Avatar. Cameron also expanded the role of the whale-like character Payakan after he proved popular in The Way of Water. In February 2024, Cameron said principal photography was essentially completed and that the crew was shooting pickups for Fire and Ash. In August 2021, Landau announced that Simon Franglen would compose the score for the Avatar sequels. 108-109. In October 2025, it was announced that an original song for the film, titled Dream as One, would be written by Miley Cyrus with Mark Ronson and Andrew Wyatt. The song was released on November 14, 2025, and plays during the end credits. The Fire and Ash soundtrack was released on December 5, 2025. A second original song, The Future and the Past, composed by Fran Glenn and sung by Saldaña in the fictional NA6 language, closes the album. It was reported that the marketing budget for Fire and Ash was approximately $150 million. In late July 2025, the film's teaser trailer was released online and in theaters before screenings of The Fantastic Four: First Steps. A full trailer was released on September 25. In October 2025, Avatar: The Way of Water was re-released in theaters, with one of 3 clips from Fire and Ash randomly inserted as a mid-credits scene. One of the scenes showed Quaritch approaching an encampment of Ash Na6 and having a confrontation with Varang. Another of the scenes showed Sully's family boarding a Wind Trader ship and meeting with Palak. A third scene started with the Sully family flying in the Wind Trader ships when they are attacked by Ash Na6. Avatar: Fire and Ash was released in the United States and Canada on December 19, 2025, by 20th Century Studios. Like its predecessor, the film was subject to multiple delays, in this case, 9 in total, as the crew needed more time for writing, pre-production and visual effects. Its release was originally scheduled for December 2015, but was pushed back multiple times until its final release date of December 19, 2025 was confirmed. Both the COVID-19 pandemic and the 2023 Writers Guild of America strike played a role in the delays. The Australian premiere of the film that was scheduled for December 15 was cancelled after the 2025 Bondi Beach shooting. In Hong Kong, the release was delayed until January 8, 2026 due to the Wangfuk Court fire, making Hong Kong the last territory worldwide to receive a release. The subtitle Fire and Ash was removed in Hong Kong to avoid insensitivity. Avatar: Fire and Ash was released in multiple formats, including Dolby Cinema, IMAX 3D, and 4DX. The 4DX format incorporates moving seats and environmental effects such as wind, water, and vibration to accompany on-screen action. The film is dedicated to editor John Reif-Watt and producer John Landau, who died in 2023 and 2024, respectively. On March 31, 2026, Avatar: Fire and Ash was released for digital download, which contains behind-the-scenes featurettes. It was released on 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray, Blu-ray 3D, and DVD by 20th Century Home Entertainment on May 19, 2026, which marked Buena Vista Home Entertainment's final in-house physical media production label before Disney laid off its entire staff in April 2026. The film became available to stream on Disney Plus on June 24, 2026. Avatar: Fire and Ash grossed $404.3 million in the United States and Canada, and $1.086 billion in other territories, for a worldwide total of $1.490 billion. By December 17, 2025, prior to the film's release in the United States and Canada, Deadline Hollywood projected an opening weekend of $340 to $380 million worldwide. It ended up opening to $347.1 million worldwide. The film made $12 million during Thursday previews in the United States and Canada, $5 million less than the previews for Avatar: The Way of Water. It ended up grossing $89.2 million during its opening weekend in the United States and Canada. Despite leading the box office and grossing more than the 2009 film's weekend debut of $77 million, the film's opening weekend domestic gross was a significant decline from the $134.1 million made by its predecessor in 2022. In its second weekend, Avatar: Fire and Ash retained the top spot at the box office and grossed $63.1 million, a decline of 29% and smaller than its predecessor's second weekend drop of 53%. In its third weekend, Avatar, Fire and Ash once again topped box office with $41.4 million, a decline of 34%. The film topped the box office again in its fourth weekend with $21.5 million, a decline of 49%. It retained the top spot at the box office in its fifth weekend with $14.5 million, declining 33%. In its sixth weekend, Avatar, Fire and Ash was surpassed by Mercy, grossing $6.4 million. Due to Avatar, Fire and Ash, IMAX revenue and operating earnings surged, climbing 35% to $125.2 million for the fourth quarter of 2025, compared to $92.7 million in the 2024 period. The company said that the third Avatar film, which Cameron urged moviegoers to see in IMAX, drove record box office for the quarter, contributing $112 million in ticket sales to become IMAX's highest-grossing Hollywood film. The template below, Rotten Tomatoes Pros, is being considered for deletion. See templates for discussion to help reach a consensus. On the review aggregator website Rotten Tomatoes, 65% of 359 critics' reviews are positive, with an average rating of 6.3/10. The website's consensus reads, remaining on the cutting edge of visual effects, Fire and Ash repeats the narrative beats of its predecessors to frustrating effect, but its grand spectacle continues to stoke one-of-a-kind thrills. Metacritic, which uses a weighted average, assigned the film a score of 61 out of 100, based on 59 critics, indicating generally favorable reviews. Audiences polled by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of A on an A+ to F scale, the same grade as the previous two films. Publications characterized the film's critical reception as ranging from mixed to positive. Initial reactions were mostly positive, with critics calling the film an ultimate cinematic spectacle, though there was criticism of the plot. Pete Hammond of Deadline Hollywood praised the film's technical aspects, calling it a true epic and a visual knockout. Max Scoville of IGN wrote that it isn't the technical leap forward that its predecessor was, which is to be expected after 3 years instead of 13. But what it lacks in novelty, it more than makes up for with refinement on every level. David Ehrlich of IndieWire wrote that it lacked the unprecedented spectacle of its predecessors, adding that it feels like something you've already seen before, though naturally finds a way to make Journey feel novel and invigorating at times. Owen Gleiberman of Variety called it a bolder and tighter film than its predecessor, praising its dramatically focused story and awesome action. While acknowledging it lacks the visually unprecedented feel of previous entries, he found it a deeply immersive experience. Writing for The New Yorker, Justin Chang described the film as a visually spectacular but less transporting experience than its predecessors. He felt the film's length offers immense visual scale, but lacks a sense of meaningful narrative progress or passage from one world to the next. Bill Jebari of Vulture declared it the richest film in the franchise and the one in which we most lose ourselves, the one that makes us wonder about these characters and constantly peer into those rapturous backgrounds, trying to see forever. Peter Bradshaw of The Guardian described Fire and Ash as a gigantically dull hunk of nonsense. While acknowledging it as a vast, dazzling spectacle with volcanic world-building and thunderous action, he criticized it as a long, humorless, and emotionally empty experience. Stephanie Zacharek of Time wrote that with Fire and Ash, the franchise has lost its wonder, and described the film as a nostalgia trip and a calculated form of déjà vu, suggesting the spectacle has become a tiresome, repetitive stupor rather than true magic. Robbie Collin of The Telegraph called the film humorless and mind-numbing, and said it feels like a relic of an earlier era and suggested Cameron is stuck in a creative cul-de-sac. Writing for The Wall Street Journal, Kyle Smith felt the film offers little in the way of compelling drama and called the script ludicrously weak. At the 98th Academy Awards, Fire and Ash was nominated for Best Costume Design and won Best Visual Effects. Fire and Ash is the first film in the Avatar series not to be nominated for Best Picture. With 12 award nominations, Fire and Ash was tied with The Fantastic Four, First Steps and Sinners for the most nominations at the 53rd Saturn Awards. Ultimately, the film won 5 Saturn Awards, including Best Science Fiction Film and Best Film Direction. Fire and Ash is the second of 4 planned sequels to Avatar. Cameron stated in a 2017 interview that if Way of Water and Fire and Ash do not meet box office expectations, Avatar 4 and Avatar 5 will not be produced. He said the 2 final sequels will share an overarching narrative, similar to the story shared by Way of Water and Fire and Ash. In January 2019, in the midst of the proposed acquisition of 21st Century Fox by the Walt Disney Company, Disney CEO Bob Iger confirmed that both Avatar 4 and 5 were being developed but had not been officially greenlit. According to producer John Landau in February 2019, Iger may have been misinterpreted. He said that Avatar 4 and 5 are not only greenlit but also a third of Avatar 4 has already been filmed. In September 2022, at the D23 Expo, Cameron announced that production for Avatar 4 had officially begun. In January 2024, Cameron said that he would not start filming the remainder of Avatar 4 until Fire and Ash was released. In January 2026, Cameron stopped short of confirming whether Avatar 4 and 5 would officially happen, but did reaffirm Fire and Ash would need to succeed at the box office and added that he would need to figure out a way to make both sequels on a smaller budget, in order to get the approval from the studio. He also confirmed that actress Michelle Yeoh would appear in 4, if made, and that she would be a NA6 character named Pakchualat. Yeoh stated that she filmed for several weeks in 2022. According to Disney, as of March 20, 2026, Avatar 4 is scheduled for release on December 21, 2029, while Avatar 5 is scheduled for December 19, 2031. Ahead of Fire and Ash's digital release on March 31, 2026, producer Ray Sancini confirmed that both 4 and 5 were progressing into active pre-production, barring a small hiatus to update the visual effects process with new technology. In April 2026, The Wrap reported that there were ongoing conversations on how to make future Avatar movies cheaper and shorter than their predecessors so that they are a less risky investment for Disney, though according to the report, Disney has yet to make a decision. It's all about compare and contrast. Fire and Ash made half of what the first movie made. And ticket prices in 2009 were not what they are in 2025. That's the level that James Cameron and the Avatar films are operating in, said Paul Durgarabdian, head of marketplace trends at Comscore. In May 2026, Cameron said his crew was exploring new technologies that might allow them to make the sequels more efficiently. He said he was hoping to make the films in half the time compared to their predecessors and for 2/3 of the cost, and that it would take roughly a year to figure out how to accomplish that. For 16 years, James Cameron has sustained the excitement surrounding the Avatar franchise. When a new sequel arrives, you don't just feel like you're going to a movie. It's more like looking forward to a drug trip. But can a third ride on this eyeball-tickling action psychedelic still provide the shock of the new? How high will we get this time? The first Avatar, 2009, had that shimmering iridescent wonder as it ushered us into the extraterrestrial jungle and hanging rock viewmaster universe of Pandora. It also tantalized us by holding out the promise that we were getting our first real glimpse of the movies of the future. By the time Avatar, The Way of Water, 2022, came out, that promise had lost its luster. In those 13 years, Hollywood's 3D revolution melted away, but the sequel still bedazzled, with underwater sequences so sculpted and tactile that on the level of a virtual reality theme park ride the film was a hypnotic feat, even if it was getting harder to pretend that we were overly invested in the fate of Pandora and its tall blue humanoid meets gazelle denizens. Coming just 3 years after The Way of Water, Avatar, Fire and Ash, whose title suggests that Cameron is working his way through the classical elements, Can Avatar, the apex of air, be far behind, has a higher bar of novelty to clear, since at this point we've been through a whole panoply of experiential Avatar trickery. The new movie, for all its inevitable breathless technological advances, doesn't feel as visually unprecedented as the last one did. If anything, though, it's a better film, bolder and tighter, with a more dramatically focused story, and it certainly has its share of amazements. This time, the 3D announces itself with less showiness. The cavalcades of flame, of which there are plenty, don't pop out at us quite the way the Life of the Oceans did last time. Where you get that immersive Avatar rush is in the extraordinary action sequences, like one where Jake Sully, Sam Worthington, and his allies zip on those flying griffins through the industrial lattices of the military compound where the Rasta-haired surfer bro Spider, Jack Champion, is being held captive. His biological father is the dastardly Quaritch, played by Stephen Lang in full-throttle mean machismo mode. No one stages action with the blend of vastness and logistical detail that Cameron does. It's as if we were watching mystic beasts from The Lord of the Rings fly through the sets of Blade Runner, and the miraculous thing is that not a moment of it feels staged. It's a twisting and turning in the air-hurtling existential war. Cameron has been spreading the gospel of how much he disapproves of AI, and the screening of Fire and Ash I attended was preceded by a taped video message in which the director declared, with pride, that not a single moment of the movie was created by generative AI, that it was the actors who put life and blood into each of those characters. Okay, but who's kidding whom? The Avatar films aren't AI generated, but as much any film franchise in history, they point to a future of screen acting that melds the human and the synthetic. They have plenty of AI spirit, even as there's no debating that the looks and personalities of the actors shine through, as has been standard with motion capture for a long time. The story and characters of Fire and Ash work fine, though it says a lot that the film's universe is one in which the serviceable Sam Worthington can seem as interesting as any actor around him. His Jake is angry this time. At the end of The Way of Water, he'd lost his eldest son, Nitiam, Jamie flatters, and he wants revenge, even though that's not the NA6 way. He is now into arming his holistic bow and arrow clan with machine guns, which feels like the equivalent of the rifles that Native American tribes used to brandish in certain westerns. Loak, Britton Dalton, Nitiam's brother, feels his loss most acutely, and his grief is our entry point into the story, which picks up 1 year after Jake and Neytiri have settled in with the Metiana clan. The conflict now centers on Spider, who is Jake and Neytiri's adopted human son. Neytiri, played with a volatile charge by Zoe Saldaña, wants to cut him loose from the family. She thinks he's putting them in danger, and when the children are stranded in the jungle and Spider acquires the ability to breathe without a mask, because his body has been invaded by mycelium, don't ask, that proves to be the pivotal plot point. If Quaritch can capture Spider, and his scientists can reverse engineer what happened to Spider's body, they can then swarm Pandora with humans and ruin it. Cameron hasn't lost his zesty storytelling brio, even if the story he tells is starting to feel like his version of the Star Wars prequels. As in, it's fine, but do we actually care about it? Cameron himself has a sixth sense for when to break up the windy chronicle of Pandora with a squid attack, characters leaping across floating rocks like something out of the Super Mario Bros. Movie, or the introduction of a sinister new NA6 clan, the ash-skinned, volcano-dwelling Mang Quan, whose leader, the witchy Varang, Una Chaplin, suggests one of Andrew Lloyd Webber's cats crossed with Marilyn Manson. She forms an alliance with Quaritch, based mostly on a slightly campy mutual attraction. John Waters has said that he dropped acid so often in the 60s and 70s that he had to stop tripping because it had begun to seem like reruns. That's a feeling that has the potential to set in with the Avatar films. The good news is that the series hasn't reached that endgame, yet. Is there anyone better at the art of the sequel than James Cameron? Terminator 2, Judgment Day, Aliens, and Avatar, The Way of Water are wonderful examples of how to build on what came before instead of just repeating it and hoping people don't notice. So it makes sense to go into Avatar, Fire and Ash, hoping it will expand on the world and themes of the first two films rather than just running it back. Leave those hopes at the door. While Fire and Ash does spectacle well, because of course it does, it squanders the opportunity to close out what could be a trilogy, although I'd wager a fourth film still happens, with Weight and Fury. The movie is constantly nodding to new ideas in Rick Jaffa and Amanda Silver's script before running back into the blue safety of what it's done before. Yes, this film was apparently written as one long script with the last one, but that doesn't justify its bizarre repetition, hitting so many of the same beats as Way of Water that future generations won't be able to tell one from the other. Great sequels don't just repeat, they build. This one treads beautifully rendered water. It's been a year since the climax of The Way of Water, which included the death of Nitiam. Jake, Sam Worthington, has grown distant from his son Loake, Britton Dalton, who opens the film narrating a beautiful sequence about loss, which feels like a promise of a story of grief and guilt that never really surfaces. While Loake and Jake struggle to figure out how to reconnect after the tragedy, Neytiri, Zoe Saldaña, is adrift in her pain, feeling like she can't find stability so far away from home. Again, Cameron and his writers play with ideas about peace versus power and how those who stay in tune with Mother Earth, or, in this case, Iwa, will overcome those who seek to destroy it. In the latter category, we once again face off against Quaritch, Stephen Lang, now in full NA6 form, even as he awkwardly walks around a military base and shouts orders at Edie Falco and Giovanni Ribisi. Stuck in the middle, where he occupies way too much screen time in Fire and Ash, is Spider, Jack Champion, now the adopted son of Jake and Neytiri. A few smart sequences between Spider and Kiri, Sigourney Weaver, regarding how they feel like outsiders in their communities can't make up for an exorbitant amount of time spent with the underdeveloped Spider. While Weaver does an incredible job imbuing Kiri with the pain of someone whose identity keeps them from that which they believe will make them happy, Spider is just woefully underwritten, which is especially frustrating given how essential he becomes to the plot when the humans see him as the key to future domination of the planet. Into this fraught family dynamic drops Varang, Una Chaplin, the visually striking leader of a cult-like group of NA6 warriors known as the Manquan. If Tanawari, Cliff Curtis, and his waterlogged Matayana clan represent a quest for peace in a time of conflict, the Manquan are set up as a counter to that, an almost feral representation of impulsive, selfish violence. When Quaritch finds his way to Varang's lair, Cameron stages his best sequence in the film, sketching Varang as a sort of cult leader, an almost Manson-esque figure who rules through force and manipulation. And then he totally drops the ball. Without spoiling, Varang becomes a secondary or even tertiary character, a side piece for Quaritch rather than a true villain in her own right. It's one of the biggest disappointments in Cameron's career, especially given how wonderfully he's brought strong female heroes and villains to life in the past. Instead of developing Spider or Varang, Fire and Ash hurtles toward a climax that's nearly identical to The Way of Water, right down to poachers underestimating the ability of the Tulkun to ruin their day. Of course, many will forgive the storytelling flaws of Fire and Ash in favor of the pure spectacle of it all. In a time when it feels like entertainment is contracting under the weight of shoddy streaming service originals and the abundance of AI, it's tempting to give Fire and Ash a pass just for how much it seeks to wow the viewer. Cameron feels like one of the few remaining directors who, first and foremost, tries to make sure that viewers get the most for their entertainment dollar. If he never makes a film again outside of this franchise, and it increasingly seems likely that he won't, he can still claim to have done something that few ever have, created his own entire film universe, one that will outlive all of us through theme park rides, toys, video games, and more. There's a big part of me that wants to give Fire and Ash a pass on billion-dollar chutzpah alone. Yet the disappointment of what this could have been hangs in the air. From the unfulfilled promise of Varang and Spider to the sequences that feel like exact carbon copies of ones from The Way of Water, I can't imagine anyone thinking this film is the best of the trilogy. And that's what feels so new for James Cameron, someone who used to know how to raise the temperature in sequels instead of just sifting through the debris. Avatar, Fire and Ash is a 2025 American epic science fiction film directed by James Cameron from a screenplay he co-wrote with Rick Jaffa and Amanda Silver. Produced by Lightstorm Entertainment, it is the third installment in the Avatar film series and the sequel to Avatar, The Way of Water, 2022. The film features Sam Worthington, Zoe Saldaña, Sigourney Weaver, Stephen Lang, and Kate Winslet reprising their roles from previous films. The story follows the human-turned-Na6 Jake Sully and his family on the habitable moon Pandora, as they face the combined threat of the human RDA forces and the Mang Quan, a tribe of ruthless, warmongering and collaborationist Na6. Cameron, who had stated in mid-2006 that he would like to make sequels to Avatar, 2009, if it was successful, announced the first two sequels in early 2010 following the success of the first film, with Avatar 3 aiming for a December 2015 release. However, the addition of two further sequels and the development of new technology required to film performance capture scenes underwater, a feat never accomplished before, led to significant delays to allow the crew more time to work on the writing, pre-production, and visual effects. The film started shooting simultaneously with The Way of Water in New Zealand on September 25, 2017. Filming completed in late December 2020, after over 3 years of shooting. With an estimated production budget of at least $350 million, it is one of the most expensive films ever made. Avatar, Fire and Ash had its world premiere at Dolby Theatre in Hollywood, on December 1, 2025, and was released in the United States on December 19 by 20th Century Studios. Critical response was generally positive, with praise for the visual effects and spectacle, but criticism for repeating the narrative beats of its predecessors. It was a box office success, grossing $1.486 billion and becoming the third highest grossing film of 2025, but also the lowest grossing film of the series. Among its numerous accolades, it was named as one of the top 10 films of 2025 by the American Film Institute and the National Board of Review, and was also nominated for 2 awards at the 98th Academy Awards, including Best Costume Design and one for Best Visual Effects, and received 2 nominations at the 83rd Golden Globes. 2 sequels, Avatar 4 and Avatar 5, are scheduled for 2029 and 2031, respectively, though their status is dependent on the box office performance of Fire and Ash. Avatar, Fire and Ash is going to make a ton of money. Not because it's a great movie, spoiler, it isn't, but because it's a spectacle that people can't resist. Just look at Avatar, The Way of Water. It garnered an unspectacular 76% critic approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes, yet grossed the third most money at the box office in history, $2.34 billion. And why? Because Way of Water was also a spectacle that people couldn't resist. Let's get the praise out of the way first. The obvious reason people saw Way of Water, and why they will see Fire and Ash, is because of the visuals. And rightfully so. To this day, the Avatar movies are the only ones that use 3D filming to its full potential. Not the 3D post-production garbage that was slapped onto countless movies after the first Avatar, but the very, very expensive and fully immersive 3D that director James Cameron developed specifically for the Avatar films. Combined with the very best in digital animation and CGI, the entire Avatar franchise is breathtakingly gorgeous. When you find yourself shedding a tear or two during any of these movies, it's not because of the story or characters, it's because your eyes are orgasming. Good story or not, the visuals alone, and auditory effects, for that matter, are worth the price of admission. It's why we still go to art museums, gawk at the Aurora Borealis, and watch fashion shows. And you know where this is going now, don't you? For all the work put into the aesthetics of the Avatar films, it's disappointing that the stories and writing have been so mediocre. The first film was just Ferngully with guns, but at least it had a coherent story. The second film was a messy revenge plot served with a side of whale hunting and family angst. It was only kind of coherent and did itself no favors by bringing the first film's unlikable villain, Colonel Quaritch, Stephen Lang, back to life, soap opera style, practically the same way Joey's Dr. Drake Raymore was brought back to life in Friends. Unfortunately, Fire and Ash is an even less coherent movie than Way of Water. It's also almost a remake of Way of Water. Quaritch is still trying to kill Jake, Sam Worthington. Quaritch burns villages and tortures NA6 again just to get someone to tell him where Jake is. There's a long sequence of NA6 playing with creatures underwater. Humans are still hunting tulkuns, whale-like creatures, for their brain fluid. I guess humans gave up on the unobtainium. A tulkun named Payakan saves lowercase Britton Dalton, life again. Spider, Jack Champion, is captured by Quaritch again. Quaritch tries to befriend Spider again. Jake's kids are taken hostage multiple times again. Kiri, Sigourney Weaver, is told again by Dr. Spellman, Joel David Moore, that if she tries to connect to the underwater tree one more time it will kill her. The final act is yet another massive battle near the Metiana village featuring tulkuns, all of them, this time, and lots of human vehicles. The difference between Way of Water and Fire and Ash is, for much of Fire and Ash, I was just lost. I didn't know why anybody was doing anything anymore. Neytiri, Zoe Saldaña, is mad because her son died but also because her entire family is part human? Payakan is exiled again or something. The humans are trying to capture Spider because he gains the ability to breathe the air on Pandora, but the climax of the film is solely whale hunting again. Jake is still yelling at his kids like a drunk dad trying to watch football. There are a few new elements of Pandora tossed in to break up the repetitiveness. 2 new NA6 tribes are introduced. The Wind Traders, who fly blimp/sky sailing ships pulled by flying creatures, though are barely in the movie. And the Mangquan clan, a clan of bloodthirsty raiders, led by Varang, Una Chaplin, who raid, and kill, other NA6 tribes and eventually join with the humans despite the humans spending 2 movies indiscriminately killing NA6 of any clan. But after introducing the new clans, the film goes right back to incoherence. There is a pointless scene where Quaritch has an acid trip after being forced to inhale some drug from Varang. Varang says she must see who he truly is and it is very unclear what that means or if the trip even accomplishes that. Meanwhile, the tulkuns have a gathering of their elders and they appear to be wearing metal horn rings. Question: how do they even put them on or in with only flippers? And why there is a massive press corps in the human base? And finally, if humans can upload memories/consciousnesses of the dead into avatars, then they don't need the tulkun brain fluid which is used for anti-aging. Right? Right? Sorry, got a bit incoherent myself just then. That tends to happen during a 3-hour and 17-minute film that makes less sense than a Salvador Dali painting. Even with mind-blowing visual effects, it's impossible not to blink every now and then, giving your brain a chance to go, wait, wasn't that guy dead? With 2 more Avatar films yet to come out, I don't have much hope left that the overarching story can be salvaged. Fire and Ash doesn't resolve any larger story arcs or really even the smaller story arcs. It would have greatly benefited from cutting the humans out entirely and focusing solely on the dynamics and connections between the various tribes. Maybe Cameron will surprise us all and make a major course correction. And we'll see the next 2 films because Resistance is futile. One of the biggest reasons is its antagonists. Colonel Quaritch and Varang completely dominate the film whenever they're on screen. In this installment, James Cameron finally gives Quaritch the space he's always needed, with an enormous payoff. Here, he feels like a fully realized character rather than a mere instrument of conflict. His growing exposure to Pandora's way of life, his bond with Spider and his vendetta against Jake, gives his character real internal tension. His changing nature and his compatibility with Varang's violent nature makes him the most compelling character in the whole franchise, which was a bit surprisingly, because I thought his character was just flat in the first film. Varang herself is a total standout. Loved her design, her chaotic and unpredictable character. I thought she's the most interesting character NA6 that has been introduced in the series. Her people add so much more layer in the ideological and religious conflict to Pandora. That being said, for a film titled Fire and Ash, it's hard not to feel that her people, her tribe deserved deeper exploration. It was such a shame that they never fully commit here. Instead, majority of the scenes are in the water. Another good thing, and I thought a very much needed improvement in the series, is how it handled its younger characters. The Way of Water devoted tremendous amount of time to juvenile drama, and Fire and Ash reigns that inconsiderably. Jake and Neytiri may not be the best protagonist, but we as an audience are already emotionally invested in their journey. I thought Neytiri's solo rescue of Jake's was one of the film's best sequences. Visually, the final act is pure Cameron magic, excess, in the best possible way. The action is massive, relentless, and engaging. Whatever issues the movie has, James Cameron's command of grandeur and spatial display remains unmatched. That said, I thought the film's length works against it, and structurally it feels repetitive. Characters are captured, they escape, and then recaptured again that it loses the tension. And as I've said earlier, it feels like we're just watching an extended version of The Way of Water. For something that should have been a thematic shift for the franchise, the film struggles to find its distinct identity. Love the writing when it comes to Quaritch, Spider and even Neytiri, but most dialogues remains uninspired. But despite its flaws, Avatar, Fire and Ash left me buzzing in a way this franchise never has before due to its ambitious, darker, and more character-driven story. Minus the repetitiveness, it may not fully escape the shadow of its predecessors, but I love that it is evolving. For me, it is the most memorable Avatar installment so far, another great adventure delivered by the one and only James Cameron. Truly, there is nothing out there at the moment with the ambition and multicolored excellence like Avatar. Just 3 hours of non-stop visual excellence for your eyeballs with a sheer tenacity that we don't see come out of Hollywood much anymore. But, this is the third outing in the series, and the question is, can it keep feeling fresh coming back to the same world again and again? Before we jump in, I do want to make clear that for this review, we watched the standard presentation, so no 3D, 4DX, or other extras other than the meal I ordered halfway through because I splurged on the nice seats. So, we won't be able to comment on whether the 3D, etc., is worth the ticket price. So, to set the scene, everyone is still reeling from the end of Avatar, The Way of Water, where to save his family, Jake Sully, Sam Worthington, and Neytiri's, Zoe Saldaña, son Nitiam, Jamie Flatters, sacrificed himself to save his family, and Spider, Jack Champion, no less. Everyone is grieving in their own way, and most of those ways are not very helpful. However, after some battery mix-ups show how vulnerable Spider is out here in the wilds, the parents decide it's time to send Spider back to the researchers, where he will be closer to humans and safer. It is a long trip back, full of dangers, but not just from human/sky people. For within the Na'vi, there are the Mangquan clan led by Varang, Una Chaplin, who are raiding and killing all those they come across. It is not hard to say that this is the best visuals that we have seen in an age when it comes to digital artistry. The planet of Pandora feels lush and real in a way that you almost wish you could reach out and touch it, go swimming in its oceans, and walk through its forests. This is taken to a new level with the introduction of the Wind Traders led by Palak, David Thewlis. They have these ships, which are a combination of two different animals, a giant Portuguese man-of-war-like creature that floats thanks to a giant gas bag and a sort of nudibranch that provides forward momentum. It is such an odd sight to see, maybe not so strange if you have watched Nope, but it works so well. There are genuinely no comparisons when it comes to the visual excellence on display here, and that is even before we get to the motion capture. No one is doing motion capture as well as this in the industry. All of the Navi characters are so seamlessly created that you will forget they are digital creations at times. Part of that is coming from the acting, of course. There is a reason that you hire people like Sigourney Weaver and Kate Winslet, even though you never see their faces. But then you do, because that performance and those characters are melded together. This is a film with so many characters that you will lose track of how many people there are during its runtime. Indeed, I had to have the wiki open when writing this review just to be sure that I got everyone right. However, what the film is very good at doing is making sure that you always know the vibes of who a character is, so if you can't remember who that person was, you will know immediately where they fit in the story. I would say that everyone is pretty much on par with their previous films, but with an added level of grief that works for some but feels a bit forced in others. However, I will say that this film is over 3 hours, and there are still big name additions to the film, such as CCH Pounder, Edie Falco and Giovanni Ribisi, who feel underutilized. On that front, there also feels like there were some missed opportunities in this film. I understand the role that the Mang Quan clan play in this film, especially Varang, who exists as a cautionary tale for Neytiri if she continues to let grief fill her heart with hate. But they are also a huge, missed opportunity for the film. Navi apostates are a fascinating concept to play around with. Yet, here they felt more like walking stereotypes, which, given that the film is already pulling heavily from Polynesian and indigenous cultures, makes the situation feel a little on the nose, the more I have pondered on it since watching the movie. There is a straightforward litmus test that you can do to see if you will like the story of this film. Did you like the story of the last two? If you did, then you should be fine here, because it is just the same thing over and over again. In some ways, I am being a touch facetious with that, because no, they are not entirely identical. However, all the big narrative beats play out as if this is Avatar, The Way of Water redo time, but with added grief, and we already know how to swim. For example, Spider getting co-opted by forces outside of his control. This is most noticeable in the final action set piece, which follows the same narrative through line as all the other films. Almost down to the same story plot points happening to the same characters, but with an added Chekhov's magnetic anomaly. While this is frustrating, it does not completely derail the film, mainly because everything else is firing at such a high level. However, it is indicative of some of the narrative cracks starting to show, which I hope they work on for the next outing. For example, I think we have reached the end of the engaging narrative for Colonel Miles Quaritch, Stephen Lang, unless they dramatically change things next time. The ending did land, but the more I think about these films, the more I feel that they did Michelle Rodriguez dirty. In the end, do we recommend Avatar, Fire and Ash? Yes. Despite the narrative déjà vu, the sheer audiovisual ambition still makes this worth seeing on the biggest screen you can find. You are not going to get a spectacle anywhere close to this anywhere else at the moment. It is bombastic, bright, and beautiful. It is starting to show some fraying at the edges, but that does not entirely take away from the whole. There is a moment early in Avatar, Fire and Ash where the copious and three-dimensional CG vistas of James Cameron's Pandora are not picture perfect. It is after an action sequence in which one group of renegade NA6 firebomb another tribe. Our heroes are thus blasted out of the sky and laid low along a heavily forested jungle floor. It is in this precise breath, or perhaps a blink that occurs between breaths, where a bioluminescent vine reaches out for the children of Jake Sully and Neytiri, that I clocked it, an incongruity, a computer-generated image which does not look quite photorealistic. As it turns out, even gods bleed. Pointing this out, of course, is the definition of nitpickery. When so much else of Avatar 3 is as gorgeously realized and methodical as this third trip to Pandora tends to be, it can admittedly be jarring to catch imperfections out of the corner of one's eye. But like a microscopic flaw in a jewel, it is only worthy of commentary to a point. The thing still shimmers in its king's scepter when he waves it around declaring himself ruler of the world. In fact, there might be more visual inconsistencies that my feasting, 3D bespectacled eyes simply missed while being overwhelmed. If there are any aesthetic quibbles to be had, though, they vanish like mist beneath a neon-tinged sunrise in a movie this uniformly rapturous across its gargantuan 197-minute runtime. Whatever else you make of Avatar, Fire and Ash's narrative cul-de-sacs about blue aliens once again rising up against the ravages of the human race, the threequel remains an aesthetic triumph and simultaneous indictment of so much else churned out of the Hollywood blockbuster machine. Why can't the plains of Minecraft, or the wastelands of Deadpool and Wolverine's Void look this eye-poppingly wondrous? Then again, I am left to also wonder why I take it all for granted so much so that I get distracted by the most trivial of blemishes when considering what to write about a movie with a running time longer than Oppenheimer and a stone's throw away from Return of the King. It might be because while this has the scale of an epic, it frustratingly maintains the thematic depth and complexity of a children's fairy tale picture, and Disney's Pocahontas to be specific. To be absolutely clear, Fire and Ash is a good movie. It is also a step up from second film The Way of Water, which in many respects felt more like a showcase on a tech convention's floor of what James Cameron's digital innovations can now do with H20. One of the most damning critiques I've heard from colleagues about Fire and Ash is that it is The Way of Water all over again, but if so, it is a better iteration of the same story. This time we have some semblance of narrative momentum due to the travails of the only Sully child with any dimensionality, the adopted child Spider, Jack Champion. Fire and Ash is genuinely Spider's movie since he is the impetus upon which the entire plot pivots. After the events of The Way of Water, where the eldest son of Jake Sully, Sam Worthington, and Neytiri, Zoe Saldaña, died during a replay of Titanic, Neytiri has come to despise their humanoid sky person son, Spider. Also unable and unwilling to return to his Homo sapien heritage in the civilization corner of land that's been deforested into a Blade Runner-esque hellscape, young Spider is effectively being banished by all sides to live with distant NA6 relations. That is until the Sully clan's floating transport is attacked by Varang, Una Chaplin, a witchy NA6 whose Mangquan clan worships the flames of war and nihilism after a volcano wiped out their homes and neighbors some years ago. It is this crossing of the paths which leads to the Christ-like member of the Sully kin, Kiri, Sigourney Weaver, still bizarrely cast as a teenager, to call on Iwa to save Spider's life after his oxygen mask is broken. Enter those aforementioned glowy vines and some new age mysticism which turn this young man into an ahem half-breed who resembles a human but physiologically mirrors a NA6. It also captures the attention of Spider's dastardly biological father, the returning sourpuss Ol. Miles Quaritch, Stephen Lang, who continues to insist on his hatred for all things Pandora and NA6. But after so many years spent trapped inside a NA6 avatar's body, the crusty army man is starting to protest too much as he finds a soulmate in Chaplin's Varang. The pair turn out to have a lot of the same interests in common, sweet nothings like genocide, no quarter battle tactics, and maybe a dabble of blood stuff in the bedroom. Their union is what truly endangers the waterbending tribes within which the Sullus now live, leading inevitably to another climactic battle between the technologically advanced Sky People, now with their own NA6 death cult providing air support, and the virtuous aquatic tribes and their space whale bestie battalions. It is an often remarked critique that the Avatar movies seem to generally lack the same lasting relevancy of Star Wars or Lord of the Rings in the cultural imagination, despite Cameron's films making more money, at least when you do not account for inflation. But the density of Reddit posts and fan art notwithstanding, the charms of Avatar, Fire and Ash are obvious to anyone with eyes. The CG worlds are sumptuous, even without the three-dimensional gimmicks added on. In an age where tentpole spectacles dominate the multiplex, here is a vision that honestly invites the audience to inhabit its daydream for maybe a quarter of your waking day. It's a steep time investment, but its lack of self-awareness or self-effacement remains as novel and refreshing in 2025 as it did at the dawn of irony-drenched blockbuster comedies in 2009. It's just a pleasure to visit Oz once in a while. If the movies lack staying power in the imagination, it is probably because the screenplays that Cameron co-writes for this wonderland never match his visual inventiveness. 16 years since its inception, the Avatar films remain a pastiche of colonialist and white savior fantasies in the Dances with Wolves, The Last Samurai, and literal OG. Pocahontas legend vein, the latter fanned by English soldier of fortune, John Smith. But those derivative roots do not mean you cannot do interesting things with the fantasy, problematic though it might be. In the case of Fire and Ash, Cameron and co-writers Rick Jaffa and Amanda Silver introduce a variety of interesting wrinkles that would seem to channel real, troubling histories between European explorers/conquerors and indigenous peoples in North and Central America. The villainous temptress Varang and her followers flirt with being a metaphor for the complicity and/or cooperation of some native tribes and nations siding against their long-standing enemies during colonial inflection points. Think of the rival communities who sided with Cortés and the Spanish against the Aztec. Mind you, in actual history it was the standalone Aztecs who did blood sacrifices, as opposed to their native enemies. Similarly, the potential tragedy of Spider, a young person caught between two worlds and civilizations that both reject him, is one of the most poignant narratives of frontier history. Look to the story of Cynthia and Parker, or for that matter, the real historical Pocahontas. Avatar, Fire and Ash flirts with some substantively big ideas that could undergird its visual splendor. However, as with most Cameron screenplays, any dramatic or historically naughty idea is mostly straightened out or glossed over in favor of the commercial beats that he knows how to play to the hilt: star-crossed lovers on a doomed vessel, a grieving mother renewing her maternal instincts with a surrogate daughter, and yes, another iteration of the proud and noble indigenous people, led by their own adopted white man, calling on Mother Nature herself to defeat the technologically advanced white devils who run the world. Cameron plays those well-worn, and lucrative, beats incredibly well again. It's just the novelty has worn a bit thin after a third bite at the apple. That isn't to say it's poorly done. It is, again, superior to The Way of Water if for no other reason than Chaplin's evil sorceress Na6 matches Lang's scenery chewing as Quaritch, and the two have some diabolical fun as Quaritch begins going native enough to be redressed by his superiors a la Lawrence of Arabia. The climactic battle is also more satisfying this time around since all of Pandora's ecosystems get in on the anti-human action, suggesting that when the time finally comes, Cameron will definitely side with the Orcas in their anti-yacht uprising. Some of the audience servicing still seems a little forced to a critic's brain, especially the addition of another star-crossed young romance that this time involves one half of the coupling being played by a septuagenarian. But for family audiences looking for a visual distraction this holiday season, it will matter not. This thing is meant to be admired, consumed, and then like holiday lights forgotten about in a box until roughly the same time next Avatar season. One can be a Grinch and wish for more, or, like a certain holiday movie classic, grouch that a few of those little lights are not twinkling. But such petty qualifications in the face of this million-watts light show leads to pedantry. Fire and Ash is more of the same, and in some areas better. Overwhelm your senses and then go back to forgetting about the blue people until Cameron and 20th Century Studios need to collect a couple more $1 billion from us in 3 to 20 years. Human invaders haven't, as some had hoped, left Pandora after their massive defeat at the hands of the native Na6. If anything, they've redoubled their marauding efforts. And the Human Resource Development Administration, RDA, a powerful, profit-driven corporation from Earth, has come back with bigger money-making goals and bigger armaments. In fact, the RDA has trained its sights on something new, an anti-aging liquid that can be obtained from the brains of a whale-like Pandoran creature called a Tulkun. The fact that the Tulkun also happen to be highly intelligent, sentient beings with their own language, culture, music, and poetry is unfortunate from the human's point of view. I mean, the Tulkun do have to be deceased in order to drain the fluid. But that sort of uncomfortable detail has never stopped the march of human progress in the past. So with an upcoming gathering of the Tulkun, the RDA is rubbing its collective hands together in hope of a massive, harvest. In the meantime, Jake Sully, the former paraplegic human marine who inhabited a cloned NA6 and eventually became a warrior, clan leader, NA6 husband, and father, is dealing with his own problems. He, Neytiri, his NA6 wife, and their children are still reeling from the loss of son and brother, Nitiam. The young NA6 was killed at the command of the RDA. Oh, but that's not Jake and Neytiri's only concern. Their adopted human son, Spider, is struggling to live among his NA6 family. Humans can't breathe the Pandoran atmosphere. And if his oxygen mask's battery runs out at the wrong time, he will die. Jake's family doesn't think it's safe for Spider to stay with them. So they make an arrangement with the NA6 Tlalim clan, the Wind Traders, to transport him to safety. Oh, but then there's also the ever-present threat from Spider's biological father, Colonel Miles Quaritch. He had previously died at Neytiri's hand, but a digital copy of his consciousness was imprinted on yet another NA6 clone. And not only does he want to get his hands on Spider, he wants to kill Jake and Jake's whole family in the process. But wait, there's yet another danger present in the world of Pandora. The NA6 are fighting amongst themselves. The Manquan clan, also known as the Ash people, are warring against, well, everybody. Their leader, Varang, is ruthless, lustful and ready to consume or burn down anything she might lay her sights on. Early on, Jake recognizes Neytiri's suffering. He attempts to comfort her. You have your family, and you have me. And I love you so much, he tells her. This family is our fortress. And in that spirit, both Jake and Neytiri fight for their family and step forward to sacrifice themselves for the people they love. Unexpectedly, Quaritch also seems to be impacted by parental feelings for his biological son, Spider. We see him struggle with those emotions. I'm here for you, Quaritch tells Spider. If you need me, I'm here for you. Quaritch later tells the boy that he's proud of him. Spider rejects Quaritch's overtures, but Jake notices the change, and he tells the now NA6 Quaritch that he can push past the destructive traits and actions of the human he used to be. Those are a dead man's memories. You are free, Jake declares. He also tells Quaritch, you've got new eyes, Colonel. All you gotta do is open them. After a wounded mother gives birth, Neytiri tells the dying mother that she will protect the child. Iwa is referenced and connected with repeatedly in this film. And like the other two films in the series, this deity is defined as a biological, guiding mother goddess who sits at the core of the NA6 system of faith. She's something of a living network of Pandora, storing history, defending the ecosystem and allowing for deep spiritual bonding, much like a natural, planetary supercomputer. In fact, all NA6 souls are believed to return and reconnect with Iwa after death. We see several NA6 praying, singing, and chanting mantras dedicated to Iwa in the course of this film. Neytiri declares, all I have is my faith. This is the Great Mother's plan. Kiri, Jake, and Neytiri's adopted daughter, has a deep mystical connection to the deity. Kiri was born from Dr. Grace Augustine's avatar body, in a previous film, in something of a virgin birth-like moment attributed to Iwa. That's not the only seemingly biblical tip of the hat in this film. After repeatedly trying to force Iwa to magically do her bidding, for instance, Kiri is violently rebuffed by painful physical spasms. And that rejection seems like a parallel to a scriptural story, God's punishment of a disobedient Moses. And in a dire, Abraham and Isaac-like moment, Jake decides he must sacrifice someone very dear to him for the sake of the NA6. Do you still love me? The potential sacrifice asks him. With all my heart, Jake replies as he moves to kill his victim. But like the biblical story, Jake's hand is stopped at the last moment. All of that said, however, none of these allusions seem designed to point viewers back to their scriptural source so much as just being good story beats that the script writers could co-opt. Iwa does more than reject Kiri's attempts to control her. She answers requests and sends some Pandoran creatures to battle human foes, For instance, Kiri places a wood sprite in Spider's mouth, and Iwa causes tendrils to spread throughout his lungs, giving him the ability to breathe Pandora's air. And we actually see Iwa's oversized face in a vision when Kiri connects with her. Near the movie's end, it's noted that, we are all connect with the Great Mother who holds all her children in her heart. And we see images of humans and NA6 ancestors together in a spirit world. Spider and Kiri become closer throughout the course of Fire and Ash, and they kiss. Jake embraces and kisses Neytiri. But the film also takes an unexpected, sensual turn at one point. Varang, the Mangquan clan leader, covers her tall, lean body in little more than small strips of cloth. She makes it plain to everyone around her that she will take what she wants when she wants it. When Quaritch approaches Varang for help to seek out Jake, the two instantly hit it off. He delivers the weapons and power she longs for, and she looks at him lustfully. She cuts his chest with a knife and licks blood from the wound. She then declares, "I will keep you to pleasure me." Varang seductively leads him into her tent while her clansmen hoot and shoot guns into the air. Then we see Quaritch and Varang, their bodies entwined and barely covered in bed after a night together. Varang's clan dances around a roaring fire, many unclothed. Neytiri is also badly wounded and we see someone working on the wound while she sits topless. For all of the screen time this film invests in admiring the lush and graphically dynamic beauty of Pandora and its environs, it takes even more time to destroy it in loud and destructive ways. As with the prior two films, Fire and Ash is predominantly a war pic that builds to the point of an immense, protracted battle. The PG-13 rating reigns in some of the potential gore here, though there's still quite a bit of bloody spatter, but there's no reining in the percussive gunfire and explosions, the flesh-ripping arrows, knife stabs and axe slashes, the crushed NA6 and bullet-riddled creatures, and the many, many deaths of humans. There are massive bursts of fire that consume groups of foes. Ships are battered by gigantic Tulkun. And various machines and vehicles explode, sometimes killing or injuring others in the process. Those Tulkun, by the way, are a key element to the destruction on screen. At first, these intelligent creatures the size of a seagoing frigate or small destroyer refuse to struggle against the murderous humans, stating that any show of violence will only beget more violence. But then they discover a living but butchered and blind member of their clan. They realize that humans are planning a total massacre of their kind, and they decide to rise up. And the resulting sea battle, combined with attacks from other razor-toothed sea creatures, is devastating. On a more intimate level, we see battles between NA6 clans riding on flying and seagoing creatures. Characters are impaled by spears. Some are shot in the throat or chest by arrows. And wounded battlers crash to the ground. There are also gun battles. The NA6 Water clan refuses to use forbidden metal weapons, but the Mangquan and others have no such compunctions. Neytiri uses arrows tipped with explosive shells that crumple flying foes into crashing balls of fire. Animal carcasses float in the water with pools of red spreading around them. NA16s are chased, shot at and then pounded to the ground. Jake is captured and threatened by a firing squad. Someone cuts a bullet out of their own body. Spider struggles for air and almost dies. An angry and hurt teenage NA6 holds a gun to his own chin, contemplating suicide. Quaritch tortures a NA6 for information. Varang sometimes psychically links with foes to mentally torment them. People are held captive with knives to their throats. Jake drinks an alcoholic beverage. Varang blows some sort of powdered drug into Quaritch's nostril, something we witness her do with fellow clansmen, and we see the man's brightly hued drug trip. Early on in the film, Neytiri is consumed with grief over her lost son. And she's also willing to do whatever it takes to protect her family, even potentially commit murder. Jake warns her about the emotional payment for living in this hate. But in his own anger, Jake blames his youngest son for causing Nitiam's death. Because Spider is physically transformed by Iwa, The RDA scientists capture him and put him through a series of invasive tests in an attempt to duplicate the process. A number of directors have experimented through the years with filming their movies at a higher frame rate to enhance visual clarity and reduce the choppiness of action scenes. But viewers' reactions to such experiments have generally been mixed. Many declare that the films lack the cinematic feel associated with a typical 24 FPS approach. Director James Cameron's boosted frames per second magic, however, is one of the high points of Avatar: Fire and Ash. Because of this film's mostly motion capture and CG created visuals, the director is able to give his movie a hyper-realistic, almost video game-like polish. Cameron's world building is impressive. But his 3D film images are, frankly, more vivid and dynamic than anything put to screen so far. I take time to detail all of that because, well, I think that's the best that Cameron's latest has to offer family viewers. There are some expected heroes fighting bravely for others and family fighting for family moments here. But to put it bluntly, Avatar: Fire and Ash is, by and large, an overpacked 3.25 hours of little more than more. There are more characters, a flood of former cast members blended with a score or two of fresh faces and alien names you won't remember. There's an increase of bloodlust, thanks to a new NA6 villainess, who joins ranks with the already bloodthirsty Colonel Miles Quaritch. There's a bigger and more bombastic human attack, loaded with more powerful weaponry and deadlier mechs. And all those elements open the door to a much bigger onslaught of arrows to the heart, knives to the jugular, explosions and destruction. If you've been a bit uncomfortable with underdressed NA6 in past films, be ready to see a whole lot more bare blue skin this go round. The barely clad NA6 villainess, Varang, also gets very pleasure-focused with the NA6 version of Quaritch, a lustful tack we haven't seen in prior Avatar movies. We get more interactions with the NA6's Gaianistic spirituality and nature worship. And Cameron doesn't skimp in the foul language department either, making sure that the rat-a-tat-tat of profanity keeps up with the bim-bam-boom of deadliness. That lengthy list of more is all crammed into a movie template that feels a bit confusing and, at the same time, very similar to the formulaic story beats we've watched before. So take this review as you will. But if you're thinking about heading to the theater in expectation of a great, family-friendly visual showcase, you may get a lot more, and a lot less, than you're expecting. The third, and possibly final, entry in the Avatar franchise has arrived, and I can't wait to see what the box office is for this one. These movies tend to make literally billions of cash and yet no one ever talks about them. Director James Cameron has said he is holding off working on the fourth movie until he sees how this one does, so maybe he isn't so confident about this entry, but we shall see, and we should never underestimate James Cameron. Avatar: Fire and Ash is every bit as gorgeous looking as the previous movies, but the ridiculous and self-indulgent runtime of 3 hours and 15 minutes will likely put many off going to see it in the theater. After watching it, I wouldn't be in a rush to rewatch it. Cameron needs to rein his ego in and learn to edit his movies down a bit. There is no reason for this movie to be as long as it is, especially considering it's mostly just a rehash of the second movie with all the familiar themes: environment, good, humans, bad. The final battle sequence takes place on and under the sea and brings nothing we haven't seen before. It is still packed with spectacle, and as it's Cameron, you know the action will be shot well. There are some nice character moments in this one, and it even has some emotional scenes too. I think the most interesting character in Fire and Ash is Quaritch, Stephen Lang, who gets a bit more depth and character development than before, mostly due to the troubled relationship with his son, Spider, Jack Champion. The new villain Varang, Una Chaplin, is a welcome addition and comes across as quite unhinged, but the finale has so much going on that she gets lost a bit in the chaos. Jake Sully, Sam Worthington, isn't as sympathetic as before, making some odd decisions, especially the way he treats his son Loake. Neytiri, Zoe Saldaña, is still as crazy as ever, and she's become quite cold since losing her son in the last movie. I think I said this with part 2 is that there are too many NA6 characters and it's hard to tell the difference between them at times as they all look the same. The score still maintains James Horner's themes and has some epic choral moments for the action scenes and is one of the movie's highlights. Overall, I won't say anything else to avoid spoilers, but Avatar, Fire and Ash is my least favorite of the trilogy and I hope this is the final entry. There are some great action sequences, and the visuals are as stunning as ever, but it's overlong and you could easily trim the first 30 minutes as nothing really happens. If you love the world of Pandora, then you'll still have a fun time, but this won't create any new fans. Isn't it curious how each Avatar movie manages to fade from memory almost immediately after it's over? Why, upon a first-time viewing or even a second watch, do they exhilarate and remind us of James Cameron's incomparable showmanship, only to evaporate from the mind shortly thereafter? I suspect it's because the story and characters remain the weakest aspects of Avatar, 2009, and Avatar, The Way of Water, 2022. They're unquestionably thrilling spectacles, with eye-popping visuals set on the luminous alien world of Pandora. But the anti-colonial conflict follows a familiar narrative path and teems with bland tropes, leaving us moved by the wonder of Cameron's visual conceit and less so by his storytelling. Avatar, Fire and Ash follows the same pattern. I waited a few days after Cameron's Part 3 to begin writing this review, and sure enough, his latest has already started to vanish from my memory banks. And while staying power certainly factors into any assessment of a movie, I'm also certain that, should I watch it a second time, I would be thrilled and diverted once again for the duration. For Fire and Ash, Cameron's Avatar problem is amplified by the screenplay, authored by the director and the husband and wife team of Rick Jaffa and Amanda Silver. They implant a nagging sense of sameness throughout. Many of the conflicts that pervaded The Way of Water are replicated in its sequel, in a military operation headed by General Ardmore, Edie Falco, and overseen by Giovanni Ribisi's corporate goon. The human sky people continue to push for control of Pandora to exploit its natural resources. The late Colonel Miles Quaritch, Stephen Lang, his replicated consciousness now inhabiting a NA6 body, continues to hunt for the rebel leader Jake Sully, Sam Worthington, another human who went full NA6. Grieving over the loss of their eldest son, Jake remains in hiding with his NA6 wife Neytiri, Zoe Saldaña, and biological children, the young Tuck, Trinity Jolie Bliss, and angsty teen Loak, Britton Dalton, whose intermittent narration adds little to the overall structure. They also consider Kiri, Sigourney Weaver, the teenage messiah, and Quaritch's human son Spider, Jack Champion, their children. New to the story is an angry tribe of NA6 called the Ash People, led by Varang, Una Chaplin, daughter of Geraldine and granddaughter of Charlie. Varang believes her people's bad luck means that the NA6 nature god, Iwa, has abandoned them. Marked by their stark red makeup, ashen skin, and shaved heads that make them look like vampirish ghouls, the Ash People attack other tribes. Varang brainwashes them into obedience with a combination of psychedelics and her kuru, the tendril that allows NA6 to connect with flora and fauna. In a desperate move to capture Sully, Quaritch forms an unholy but very horny alliance with Varang. Elsewhere, the callous Captain Mick, Brendan Cowell, plans to invade a sacred ceremony of Tulkins, Pandora's super-intelligent whale-like species, to harvest their life-sustaining brain gel that sells for billions on Earth. This leads to a convergence of various conflicts near the water-centric Metayanid tribe's island community, mirroring the one in The Way of Water, only on a much larger scale. Apart from a few new wrinkles including Kiri's emerging connection with Iwa, which inspires her to save the air-breathing spider by converting his respiratory system to a Pandora-friendly model, the conflict proves almost identical to The Way of Water. The Sully family experiences more discord in the ranks, particularly because Jake secretly blames Loak for his elder son's death. Neytiri and Jake clash over her increasing intolerance of humans, whom she calls pink skins. Quaritch vaguely questions his loyalties. The Tulkins abhor violence, unlike their outcast brother Payakan, and eventually they face a decision, fight or die. The humans prove mostly awful, save for Jemaine Clement's marine biologist character, who finally gets a backbone. Inevitably, as Cameron often does see aliens, 1985, The Abyss, 1989, Terminator 2, Judgment Day, 1991, etc. He funnels the movie's many subplots into a grandiose finale that, despite its familiar setup, thrills to no end. Fire and Ash meanders a bit through these subplots, and that makes the 3-hour and 15-minute runtime, the lengthiest yet, feel overlong and unearned. By the end, this sequel doesn't accomplish much. The movie curiously forgets about Varang. Quaritch's fate is equivocal, meaning he'll probably return for the proposed 2029 sequel. The Sky People will undoubtedly regroup and return in force. Perhaps Cameron has settled on the same philosophy as the characters in this year's one battle after another, where the fight never ends, it just takes on alternative forms. Fortunately, the writers have cut down on Loak and Spider's annoying use of bro at the end of every sentence, despite it being the third word spoken in the film. Elsewhere, the biblical allusions continue beyond Kiri as Pandora's resident Jesus. There's also an Abraham parallel between Jake and Spider. And with Spider's newfound abilities to breathe Pandora's atmosphere, he holds the secret to Homo sapiens colonizing the planet. Will Jake follow Neytiri's advice and sacrifice Spider for the greater good? What do you think? Most of these story elements amount to a serviceable at best application of narrative. Like the cracker that carries some brie and chutney to your mouth, it's a base-level conveyance. In this case, the narrative conveys a visual morsel, a delectable display of colors and sensations. Every shot, every action sequence evokes awe, with convincing-looking characters rendered from motion capture animation and detailed environments that transport the viewer to this alien world. Fire and Ash has been made available in a variety of different formats, standard, 3D, HFR, and various combinations thereof. I attended a press screening in Dolby Cinema, featuring the 3D version in HFR, running at 48 frames per second, twice the cinematic standard of 24 FPS. The 3D gimmick alternates between immersive and distracting, particularly because I must wear those glasses over my prescription glasses, and I spend half the show adjusting my doubled-up eyewear. And the HFR, which looks like your grandpa's flat-screen TV when he has that motion smoothing effect on, comes and goes, appearing mostly during action sequences, an improvement over the incessant HFR in the way of water. Given these unnecessary accoutrements, I look forward to when I can watch Fire and Ash at home on a UHD disc on my OLED TV. I'll probably enjoy it more. And last things first, before the movie begins, Cameron appears on screen to assure viewers his production was not made by generative AI. He shows a split screen from the production process, with actors performing their lines in mocap suits next to the completed effect. But the keyword here is generative, meaning artificial intelligence that operates according to user prompts. However, Cameron does not acknowledge that many of the digital artists and their tools use AI-assisted technology to complete visual effects. Nor does he address how badly he botched recent restorations of Aliens, The Abyss, and True Lies, 1994, using AI tools. No matter. It's evidence that Fire and Ash isn't the product of someone relying on AI to flesh out the details or conceive this elaborate world. Cameron pours himself into every frame of his Avatar movies, revisiting themes and obsessions found throughout his filmography, and his enthusiasm is infectious. As ever, his technical craft is impeccable, and those who purchase tickets will surely feel it was money well spent. However, my hope is that Cameron imbues the next visit to Pandora with different stakes that don't feel like another retread, only bigger. Avatar, Fire and Ash picks up where The Way of Water left off. Jake Sully and Neytiri are carrying the heavy grief of losing a son, their kids, in particular Loak, burdened by survivor's guilt. Pandora continues to be on the edge of war with the Resource Development Administration, or the RDA. Also in the mix is a new tribe, the fire-forged Mang Quan clan, or the Ash people. These people are shaped by a hardened philosophy of survival, led by Varang, played by an incredible Una Chaplin. The Ash people do not trust Iwa and are equally power-hungry as the RDA. The two antagonist sides unite against the Na'vi and Metiana, in particular the Sully family. Jake, once again, has to save the world, while trying to find a balance that will enable him to protect his family. Cameron's world explorer's attitude toward his filmmaking is most evident in this third Avatar film. There are always worlds and people unknown to everyone who can be friend or foe, who can appear unannounced, either making life more beautiful or survival difficult. This hunger to understand the mysteries of life itself is reflected in the film's title, signifying the cycle of violence and mourning and rebuilding. It's so mystical, the same reason why I really loved the first Kantara film. However, despite the beauty of the title, the film is not moving. I am not the biggest fan of The Way of Water either, but at least that film had a sustained cause to root for, and a renewed sense of wonder and depth cued by the water people. Fire and Ash throws you into a landscape so vast and aggressively kinetic that instead of feeling pulled into it, chances are you might feel adrift. And yet, you can't help feeling a deep awe of James Cameron as a filmmaker. Sure, yes, because of the spectacle, but because he keeps pushing the art and technology of cinema forward in service of the story he genuinely wants to tell. The fact that the biggest global films of our generation are urging peace, connection, rebuilding, and communion with nature is such a huge deal, considering the fractured and greedy times we live in. No other filmmaker working today tries this hard and this obsessively to advance what cinema can be in our lifetimes. Where Fire and Ash stumbled for me is how unaffected I was with the arrival of the Ash people, and really any of the larger stakes at play. The Mang Quan are more concept than real foes, each warrior sort of blending together, except Una Chaplin's Varang, who looks like the human manifestation of a lean, sexy dinosaur. The film's most exhilarating sequence once again takes place in the skies, led by Varang, the aerial battle with magnificent airships. Atop a stunning, functional, and inviting flying vessel, Leonopteryx dock mid-air, there are hidden chambers and sweeping views of Pandora below, which reminded me that this is a world meant to be observed from above, only to be admired, too large to be conquered. There are too many little battles taking place in Avatar, Fire and Ash. A constant bombardment of danger leaves little breathing room. Everything feels perilous all the time, which makes for intense viewing, but also breeds so much exhaustion. Avatar, Fire and Ash isn't emotionally satisfying in the way I hoped. But I remain deeply appreciative of what James Cameron continuously attempts to marry, spectacle with a plea for peace. To feel like you're in the presence of something impossibly ambitious is a gift. Yes, the fact that Jake Sully is suddenly this Muad'Dib kind of figure, the Turek Makto, has annoying implications that a white American man must save local ancient tribes from the rest of the world and from each other. But there is a subplot here, revolving around arguably the film's most important arc, the human child spider, where you can sense Cameron's attempts to write that problematic connotation. It goes without saying, but there will be a lot of eyes on Avatar, Fire and Ash. And they will be watching for a number of reasons. For fans, it will be for another chance to visit the breathtaking world of Pandora. For tech lovers, it's to see how James Cameron once again pushes technical boundaries. For box office prognosticators, it will be to see if Cameron's third Avatar movie can hit the $2 billion plus mark like its predecessors. For the studio, it's to see if it makes enough money to greenlight the final two films in Cameron's groundbreaking franchise. After the enormous success of 2009's Avatar, it took the franchise's creative mastermind James Cameron 13 years to make and release its sequel, The Way of Water. To many people's surprise, more specifically, my own, the second film was also a major box office success, clearing over $2.3 billion at the box office. It was also an incredible cinematic experience that not only expanded the Avatar universe, but made the narratively shaky first film better. The Way of Water once again delivered cutting-edge action sequences and world building. But its story shifted its focus to family and all of its complexity as seen through the lenses of love, loyalty, sacrifice, and tragedy. Fire and Ash sees Cameron picking up where he left off, with Jake Sully, Sam Worthington, and Neytiri, Zoe Saldaña, navigating their family through grief following a devastating loss. And while they've found a home with the aquatic Metaina clan, that doesn't lessen the blow of losing one of their own. Cameron's script, which he co-wrote with Rick Jaffa and Amanda Silver, expands the drama within the Sully family, adding more depth and conflict to the relationships that flourished in the previous film. Back is Kiri, Sigourney Weaver, Jake, and Neytiri's adopted daughter with a special unrealized bond to the planet, Loak, Britton Dalton, the middle child who also serves as the film's occasional narrator, and Tuck, Trinity Jolie Bliss, their birth daughter and youngest child. Each member of the Sully family is mourning in their own way. Jake spends his time keeping busy rather than facing his grief. Neytiri has shut herself off and is slowly being consumed by hate. Loak is overwhelmed with guilt, believing his actions led to the previous film's tragedy. Kiri is struggling to find her purpose while wondering if she could have done more. And Tuck is lost among her grieving family and unsure how to process everything she is witnessing. Also returning is the Sully family's chief antagonist, the obsessed Colonel Miles Quaritch, Stephen Lang. Once the human military commander who brutally oversaw the colonization of Pandora, Quaritch is now a NA6 mercenary who is still persecuting the native tribes, all in the name of revenge. But this time he has found a formidable ally in Varang, Una Chaplin, the hardened leader of the volcano-dwelling Mangquan clan. While she isn't fleshed out as much as she could be, her goal is clear: to spread her fire across Pandora. The story's wild card is Spider, Jack Champion, the human son of Quaritch who was taken in by Jake and Neytiri after his ruthless father was killed in the first film. Spider's story takes several specific turns that make him wanted by nearly everyone, but for much different reasons. Spider was a little annoying in the last film. But here he's more of a sympathetic figure who's being pulled in numerous directions and for nothing that he can control. As you may be able to tell, Fire and Ash is very much a direct sequel to The Way of Water. In fact, their connections are so close that you can only really view it as an extension of the previous film. The two are narratively inseparable, which is why some might see their similarities as repetitive. But Cameron infuses every scene with purpose, whether they're personal for individual characters or building up the growing conflict that is thrusting Pandora into all-out war. Once again, Fire and Ash is every bit the jaw-dropping spectacle you expect. While this doesn't feature a technical leap as significant as we saw from Film 1 to Film 2, it's still a stunning visual showcase for digital animation, practical effects, and performance capture. And it remains the only franchise where seeing it in 3D is a must. It's all enhanced through a crisp high frame rate, which some have criticized but that I personally love. Fire and Ash may feel like The Way of Water, Part 2, but it brings some things of its own. The menacing Varang and the Mangquan clan, the Wind Traders and their massive organic barges, new sea creatures from the deep, they all make great additions to Cameron's already rich cinematic world. Yet it does have its shortcomings. Older characters pop up with nothing much to do. The movie's length doesn't quite feel as earned as before. And it uses some of the same action beats as the last film. But Fire and Ash is still a grand science fiction epic that once again transports us to an awe-inspiring world that could only come from the imagination of James Cameron. And I loved being back. Avatar, Fire and Ash is going to make a ton of money. Not because it's a great movie, spoiler, it isn't, but because it's a spectacle that people can't resist. Just look at Avatar, The Way of Water. It garnered an unspectacular 76% critic approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes, yet grossed the third most money at the box office in history, $2.34 billion. And why? Because Way of Water was also a spectacle that people couldn't resist. Let's get the praise out of the way first. The obvious reason people saw Way of Water, and why they will see fire and ash, is because of the visuals. And rightfully so. To this day, the Avatar movies are the only ones that use 3D filming to its full potential. Not the 3D post-production garbage that was slapped onto countless movies after the first Avatar, but the very, very expensive and fully immersive 3D that director James Cameron developed specifically for the Avatar films. Combined with the very best in digital animation and CGI, the entire Avatar franchise is breathtakingly gorgeous. When you find yourself shedding a tear or two during any of these movies, it's not because of the story or characters, it's because your eyes are orgasming. Good story or not, the visuals alone, and auditory effects, for that matter, are worth the price of admission. It's why we still go to art museums, gawk at the aurora borealis, and watch fashion shows. And you know where this is going now, don't you? For all the work put into the aesthetics of the Avatar films, it's disappointing that the stories and writing have been so mediocre. The first film was just Ferngully with guns, but at least it had a coherent story. The second film was a messy revenge plot served with a side of whale hunting and family angst. It was only kind of coherent and did itself no favors by bringing the first film's unlikable villain, Colonel Quaritch, Stephen Lang, back to life, soap opera style, practically the same way Joey's Dr. Drake Raymore was brought back to life in Friends. Unfortunately, Fire and Ash is an even less coherent movie than Way of Water. It's also almost a remake of Way of Water. Quaritch is still trying to kill Jake, Sam Worthington. Quaritch burns villages and tortures NA6 again just to get someone to tell him where Jake is. There's a long sequence of NA6 playing with creatures underwater. Humans are still hunting tulkuns, whale-like creatures, for their brain fluid. I guess humans gave up on the unobtainium. A tulkun named Payakan saves lowercase, Britton Dalton, life again. Spider, Jack Champion, is captured by Quaritch again. Quaritch tries to befriend Spider again. Jake's kids are taken hostage multiple times again. Kiri, Sigourney Weaver, is told again by Dr. Spellman, Joel David Moore, that if she tries to connect to the underwater tree one more time it will kill her. The final act is yet another massive battle near the Metiana village featuring tulkuns, all of them, this time, and lots of human vehicles. The difference between Way of Water and Fire and Ash is, for much of Fire and Ash, I was just lost. I didn't know why anybody was doing anything anymore. Neytiri, Zoe Saldaña, is mad because her son died but also because her entire family is part human? Payakan is exiled again or something. The humans are trying to capture Spider because he gains the ability to breathe the air on Pandora, but the climax of the film is solely whale hunting again? Jake is still yelling at his kids like a drunk dad trying to watch football? There are a few new elements of Pandora tossed in to break up the repetitiveness. 2 new NA6 tribes are introduced. The Wind Traders, who fly blimp/sky sailing ships pulled by flying creatures, though are barely in the movie. And the Mangquan clan, a clan of bloodthirsty raiders, led by Varang, Una Chaplin, who raid, and kill, other NA6 tribes and eventually join with the humans despite the humans spending 2 movies indiscriminately killing NA6 of any clan. But after introducing the new clans, the film goes right back to incoherence. There is a pointless scene where Quaritch has an acid trip after being forced to inhale some drug from Varang. Varang says she must see who he truly is and it is very unclear what that means or if the trip even accomplishes that. Meanwhile, the tulkuns have a gathering of their elders and they appear to be wearing metal horn rings. Question: how do they even put them on or in with only flippers? And why there is a massive press corps in the human base? And finally, if humans can upload memories/consciousnesses of the dead into avatars, then they don't need the tulkun brain fluid which is used for anti-aging. Right? Right? Sorry, got a bit incoherent myself just then. That tends to happen during a 3-hour and 17-minute film that makes less sense than a Salvador Dali painting. Even with mind-blowing visual effects, It's impossible not to blink every now and then, giving your brain a chance to go, wait, wasn't that guy dead? With 2 more Avatar films yet to come out, I don't have much hope left that the overarching story can be salvaged. Fire and Ash doesn't resolve any larger story arcs or really even the smaller story arcs. It would have greatly benefited from cutting the humans out entirely and focusing solely on the dynamics and connections between the various tribes. Maybe Cameron will surprise us all and make a major course correction. And we'll see the next 2 films because resistance is futile. There are lots of noticeable things, some good, some bad. For example, Neytiri sings her grief dirge, the song chord, during the opening moments, still mourning for Nitya. It's a moving callback to the previous film and does seem to have a point. However, there are also late sections, such as the Amatra scene and the calling of the clans, which just feel like they've been cut and pasted from the prior movies. As a result, Fire and Ash sometimes feels like it's telling not showing, with Loak taking up the narration duties in order to cut a few minutes out of the runtime to move the story along. These are scenes which feel jerky and way too in your face when trying to do all the things in a span of 3 Pandoran days. Did I mention the film is 3 hours and 15 minutes long? That's nearly 4 hours when you include the adverts and trailers, although it gets a pass for this as there was the new trailer for Project Hail Mary, as well as teasers for the Odyssey and Avengers, Doomsday. Don't get me wrong, the film is absolutely gorgeous and the franchise has really come into its own since 2009. The characters look real and everything about Pandora is beautiful, from the return of the Hallelujah Mountains to the sea village in which the Sully family has made their home. Everything is beautiful, but, sadly, the world doesn't feel quite as dangerous as it did in the first film. There are also notable sections where it's obvious it's supposed to be shown in 3D where characters feel like they're about to pop out of the screen, particularly in the initial section in the Hallelujah Mountains. In other sections, there's a direct FPS feel as gun sights appear. I noted quite a few sections which felt they were filmed at 65 FPS as every movement during the action felt like someone had pressed fast forward on the movement, but not the dialogue. It wasn't as nauseating as The Hobbit, but it was definitely noticeable in a weird uncanny valley kinda way. So, to the plot. Spider's been recovered, Neytiri is in mourning and it quickly becomes clear that Spider, who needs oxygen masks to survive, is going to an issue in the isolated sea village. Jake decides to send him back to civilization, where their allies keep camp. Jake arranges for the Wind Traders to take the boy, but after Kiri and Loke lose it on their parents, the entire family agrees to go with him in order to visit Neytiri's family. The Wind Traders are the last elemental tribes on Pandora, with massive biological blimps which use the sky as if it were the ocean. Their boat is gorgeous, as well as being pulled by living beings who remind me of puffer fish without the spines. However, as they travel, Jake is very aware that the Sky People forces are still looking for him and for Spider. So, when things go downhill, it happens spectacularly when the ship is attacked by the Ash clan, with the Sky People forces and Quaritch looking on. A frantic chase through the forest sees Spider's oxygen run out and, desperate, Kiri plugs herself into the local biome and causes mycelium fungus to colonize his lungs, allowing the human boy to finally breathe without a mask, and grow a queue. The film is split between Loak, who is grieving his brother, the dead golden child, and trying to get Jake to notice him, whilst fighting for what he believes in, his best pal Tulkan, Payakan, and his budding romance with Tsurya. Neytiri, who took a backseat in the last film, has now gone full racist, but the film also works on her character arc more than I would have expected. After Bineg wounded, she has to relearn to shoot and also realize that Spider is as much a Sully as Loak, Kiri, or Tuck. Seeing her finally realize that Spider is worth saving proves she is indeed trying to heal and become a better person. The one good thing about this film is we finally get some answers about Kiri, even if they raise more questions. She's basically a clone of Grace Augustine and her relationship with Spider is obviously sowing the seeds for a future romance. I understand why the proposed title for the film was The Seed Bearer, as her role is very important to the plot, even as she manages to deus ex machina twice in the span of the film. This kind of plot beat is a tad over the top, even as it does cause the next issue of concern. What happens if the Sky People can figure out how this works? The only thing preventing the human forces from winning the war is their inability to breathe the air. Figuring out how Spider has been changed would allow humans to live freely without their masks, heralding the end of the NA6 as well as other species on the planet. So who are the Ash Clan? Well, religious fanatics is as close as we can go. It's a small cult which worships the element of fire, both in the natural world and also in the Fire Mountain, which destroyed Varang's native home tree when she was a child. Since then, she's gone full pyromaniac. The clan is attacking other innocent NA6 and cutting their queues, which prevents them from connecting to the spirit trees. Varang teams up with Quaritch, whom she drugs, and then they begin trying to find Jake and Spider. She seems especially pleased when he teaches her how to use guns and flamethrowers. However, as a character, that's all we get. Her arc doesn't so much end as it gets cut off, ready for resumption in the next film, which is frustrating, as this is our first time with NA6 antagonists. The plot basically revolves around Spider and Jake getting captured and then the Sky People forces trying to murder helpless Tulkun in order to lure them out. As a result, the plot is very bouncy. I've basically described the film as a mini-series of 5 distinct episodes which were then recut, condensed and shown in a cinema. It's not terrible, but so much is happening, and then there are periods of nothing, that it's really jarring. I found myself browsing on my phone whenever Loak started narrating, and I don't think I was the only one. Also, due to the length, a lot of people were ducking out for refreshments during quieter moments or to use the facilities. It's not a bad film, not by far, but it is a near 4-hour assault on the senses. From the bioluminescence in the sea, to the epic battles and gorgeous graphics. I can guarantee it will ensnare and exhaust anyone with ADHD. Even worse, there wasn't even an intermission, which was how Cameron's earlier film Titanic made the runtime a tad more bearable. I was exhausted by the time was done, and I think this will ultimately sour people against an otherwise technologically amazing film. Sadly, I think it will be remembered not for the bars it pushes graphically and technologically, but by how it is let down by plot beats and pacing. 2022's Avatar, The Way of Water left us on a bittersweet note for the Sully family, as the last we saw of them was mere minutes after losing the eldest son, Nitiam. Not only was it a devastating blow, Zoe Saldaña's performance in that one scene is more Oscar-worthy than her performance in all of Emilia Perez, but it was a hard tonal shift from what was initially about 3 hours worth of tree hugging and swimming with space whales. There was tragedy in the first Avatar, sure, but Nitiam's death felt harrowing and visceral. Even if The Way of Water ended with catharsis, the catharsis doesn't change the fact that the Sullys have lost a family member. Retrospectively, it's almost as if Cameron took away our Floidas and tossed us into the deep end. Picking up immediately where The Way of Water left off, Avatar, Fire and Ash shifts perspective from the patriarch, Jake, Sam Worthington, to Loak, Britton Dalton, and Kiri, Sigourney Weaver, if you can believe it, the middle children of the family. Trying to make sense of the death of Nitiam, the Sully family is an absolute wreck, with matriarch Neytiri disappearing into hatred while Jake tries to compartmentalize as much as humanly, NA6ly, possible. Loak bears the weight of guilt for his brother's death, while Kiri has a crisis of faith regarding the NA6's religious figure, Iwa. There are so many moving parts to this movie, and not all of it works, but I was still left in a state of how the hell does somebody even come up with this, for Fire and Ash's bulky 195-minute runtime. Existing on the other side of the Sully coin is that of Miles Quaritch, Stephen Lang, and his NA6-raised son, Spider, Jack Champion. Quaritch, resurrected as a NA6 in The Way of Water, is on a vengeful manhunt to even the score with Jake, who just so happens to be Spider's surrogate father. Not only does the tug of war between father figures make for interesting family drama, but it also offers glimpses of pathos and humanity to a villain that could otherwise feel cartoonishly one-note. Tearing up the scenery by the minute, Lang is an absolute treasure trove of fantastic line reads and facial expressions, and has gone from being your standard evil military man antagonist into being one of the most exciting blockbuster villains we've seen in decades. Quaritch has always been a mirror to Jake, so it only makes sense that Cameron would give our villain a love interest, too. Striking up a romance with Varang, Una Chaplin, the figurehead for a group of fire-wielding bandits, Quaritch and Varang's interests and affections align through terror and destruction. The blossoming romance between Invader and Raider makes for some of Cameron's horniest writing since the iconic handprint from Titanic, bringing Avatar to places that I never thought an audience-friendly IP like this would go. It feels crazy just typing out that there's a fire-obsessed alien succubus that blows space cocaine up people's noses, but that's the type of screenwriting that makes Avatar such a trip for the imagination. Honestly, it's not a stretch to say that the villains in Fire and Ash are far more interesting than the heroes. Aside from having to adjust to clunky 3D glasses, my heart goes out to those who have to wear them on top of their normal glasses. Yielding to Cameron's imagination is as easy as pie, as long as you're picking up what he's putting down. Generic as they may seem, it's pretty easy to hop on board with basic ideals like environmental preservation, systems of belief, and family values. Not many writers have an entire planet stored directly in their brains, but the sheer creativity of the world Cameron has constructed is nothing short of staggering. After first conceptualizing Avatar in 1994, he's conjured 4 distinct element-based cultures, much to the dismay of the Last Airbender fans, entire ecosystems, and whatever's in store for Avatar 4 and 5. Imaginative excellence aside, there is a portion of Fire and Ash that does feel like it's retreading familiar elements from the prior 2 films, but especially The Way of Water, which makes sense considering that both films were part of one bigger film at one point. I'm reminded of how audiences initially reacted to Kill Bill Volume 2, another film that directly examines the fallout of its predecessor. Audiences that are more reductive than I could go as far as to call Fire and Ash Avatar 2.5, and while they wouldn't exactly be wrong, they won't be right, either. There are a few repeated plot points and moments from The Way of Water, but Cameron is at least smart enough to make them feel different in some shape or form. Even if James Cameron's pot of imagination seems to be boiling over with ideas, there's something refreshing about how uncompromised Cameron's grandiose vision is. It feels like having your brain mainlined into Cameron's, which is never a bad thing in an era where Hollywood's creative juices are depleting on a daily basis. Even if the plot stretches itself thinner than I would like, there's more than enough visual spectacle to compensate for whatever nitpicks I have with Cameron's, sometimes excruciatingly corny, screenwriting. I have absolutely no idea where Cameron could go from here, but I am more than willing to be surprised when Avatar 4 rolls around in 2029. Avatar and Avatar, The Way of Water are 2 of the highest grossing films ever made, so you can hardly blame James Cameron for keeping his sci-fi adventure series going. But its 3rd episode, Avatar, Fire and Ash, strongly suggests that he should quit while he's still ahead. Each Avatar so far has been longer and worse than the one before, and this one, a full half-hour longer than the 2009 original, is 197 minutes of screensaver graphics, clunky dialogue, baggy plotting and hippy-dippy New Age spirituality. It's terrifying to think that Cameron still has 2 more sequels scheduled. How much longer and more self-indulgent can they possibly get? The most insulting part is that even with that preposterous, bladder-testing running time, Avatar, Fire and Ash doesn't work as a standalone film with a beginning, middle, and end. Making no concessions to any viewers who aren't superfans of the franchise, Cameron assumes that we're already deeply invested in the characters, their relationships, and their surroundings, so that a complete, propulsive story is surplus to requirements. It feels as if we're a zillion light years from the excitement of the first film. The idea of that one was that the human race had made such a mess of the planet Earth that they decided to exploit the mineral resources of an Edenic, unspoiled moon named Pandora. This plan wasn't popular with Pandora's blue-skinned humanoid inhabitants, the NA6, but a human marine, Jake Sully, Sam Worthington, had his mind zapped into the body of a NA6 human hybrid, so that he could cozy up to the locals. He then fell in love with the NA6 princess, Neytiri, Zoe Saldaña, and fought alongside her tribespeople against the invaders from Earth. In short, Avatar was Pocahontas meets the Smurfs in space, a scenario ripe with conflicts and environmental issues. The situation now is that the NA6 are still fighting against the human military, but it seems that Cameron has lost interest in Jake and Neytiri, and now prefers to hang out with their teenage children. It's a fatal mistake. Worthington may not be the world's most charismatic actor, but at least his character was distinctive, whereas it's sometimes hard to tell which of Jake and Neytiri's nearly naked offspring is which, and they're all equally annoying. Every now and then there will be a big battle, or we'll see some human scientists who haven't been in the film for ages. Sometimes we'll have to sit through long, reverential discussions of the NA6's beliefs. And sometimes we'll have tantalizing glimpses of the hard-edged Empire vs Rebels eco-thriller that the film could have been. But, essentially, Avatar, Fire and Ash is a Californian soap opera in which various forgettable dreadlock surf dudes ride dragons and shout phrases like, "That was insane, bro," and, "This is sick, cuz." There's no denying that James Cameron's Avatar franchise is one of the great movie franchises of our time. When the first installment, Avatar, was released in 2009, it was immediately praised for its incredible visuals and effects, and it in fact won a staggering number of awards for that reason, including Oscars for Best Achievement in Cinematography, Best Achievement in Visual Effects, and Best Achievement in Art Direction, alongside multiple other Oscar nominations and numerous other awards and nominations. The movie also has solid Rotten Tomatoes scores, 81% with critics and 82% with audiences. It was followed by the sequel movie Avatar, The Way of Water more than a decade later in 2022, and it likewise found critical acclaim, including yet another Oscar for Best Achievement in Visual Effects, as well as a host of other Oscar nominations and numerous other awards and nominations. This movie, impressively, also managed to pull off the very difficult feat of performing better than its predecessor with audiences, at least based on its Rotten Tomatoes score, which is an impressive 92%, although, notably, the critic score dropped to 76%. In part, that success was due to the originality of the script, which built upon the first movie but also took things in a new direction by focusing on a new clan among the NA6, the Metaina, who are water-based. That unique focus made the movie feel new, even as it repeated several beats from Avatar, including by bringing back the primary antagonist, Colonel Miles Quaritch. However, the most recent edition, Avatar, Fire and Ash, largely failed to do the same. That movie saw an even greater plummet with critics, with a bleak 65% Rotten Tomatoes score. In fairness, the movie held onto a solid audience score of 90%, but critics called out a number of issues with the movie, including the fact that it once again recycled many of the same plot points such as, yet again, the return of the same antagonist and, critics argued, relied too heavily on the same visual excellence it had pulled off before, without truly making substantial improvements. In addition to those issues, though, this latest Avatar movie had numerous flaws, and many of them, confusingly, have gone unaddressed in reviews. James Cameron is obviously a brilliant filmmaker, and it's perhaps for that reason that Fire and Ash got away with things that other, newer movies probably would not have. Among those issues is the fact that the plot is doing far too much. The new clan introduced in the movie, the Manquan clan, is genuinely fascinating and terrifying, and they made for very compelling new antagonists. Unfortunately, Fire and Ash refused to rely on them as the sole antagonists, so Quaritch was back yet again, which is part of the reason the plot felt so tangled. It would have been infinitely better had the Ash people been the only antagonists, not only because their chilling behavior was so much more interesting than yet another return of this same guy, but also because it would have proven that the Avatar franchise could successfully move on beyond what it's now done several times over. Tied to this was the issue with the movie's numerous storylines, which caused the plot to feel, at times, jumbled and difficult to keep track of. Various storylines that deserved more attention also ended up feeling rushed because the movie had so many loose ends. Among the storylines that deserved more attention were those of, unfortunately, two of the more significant female characters in the movie, Neytiri and Ronal. The former is arguably more frustrating than the latter, for myriad reasons, but in both cases, the handling of these female characters is disappointing, especially compared to the female representation in Avatar. When Neytiri was introduced in Avatar, it was clear that, yes, she was going to be a love interest, but she was also a valiant, heroic, and brave character who was never going to choose a man over her people. Even in the face of the death of her father, Neytiri never gave up the fight. Avatar: The Way of Water revealed that she had multiple children now, but motherhood hadn't taken that fight out of her, a common issue with representation on screen, at least, that is, until her oldest child, Nitiam, died right in front of her. Understandably, that affected her deeply, but it was nevertheless disappointing to see how Fire and Ash dealt with that. In the latest movie, Neytiri is not only a shadow of who she once was, but also, her morals seem completely different than they'd ever been before, which included her temptation at multiple points to kill Spider, who had once been like a son to her, as well as her comments about resenting the human parts of her children. Sure, she comes around on both by the end of the movie, and she was obviously grieving. Even so, this was a major step down for her overall, and it felt like a betrayal. Also egregious, however, was the handling of Ronal's character. Killing off a new mother or a pregnant mother is low-hanging fruit in terms of raising the stakes, and it's unfortunately been done to death, pun intended, at this point. To put it perhaps too bluntly, James Cameron is better than this scene, in which Ronal gives birth to her baby and then immediately dies. This isn't to say that women shouldn't ever die. Grace is actually a good example, but killing Ronal off right after she birthed her baby was frustrating. Despite these issues and the ding to the movie's critic score, Avatar 4, a different title for which will presumably be revealed eventually, is confirmed to be in the works. The movie is slated for a December 2029 release date, meaning we are still quite a long way off from seeing the new installment. Among the details confirmed about the plot is the fact that it will include a time jump, reportedly of about 8 years. While that's not much to go on in terms of actual story details, it does suggest that this upcoming movie could finally be the change that the franchise needs. Already, there are theories that this time jump could mean the death of the franchise protagonist, Jake Sully, which fans have long speculated about. That would feel right as far as a new direction, especially because it's likely that one of his children would take his place as leader, presumably Loak, but that's not necessarily the case. No matter Jake's fate, though, Avatar, Fire and Ash proved that it is time for these movies to try something new. This film, directed by James Cameron, screenplay by James Cameron, story by James Cameron, produced by James Cameron, starring Sam Worthington, cinematography Russell Carpenter, edited by Stephen E. Rivkin, music by Simon Franglen, production company Lightstorm Entertainment, distributed by 20th Century Studios, release dates December 1, 2025, running time 197 minutes, country United States, language English, budget $350 to $400 million, box office $1.490 billion.